Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue talking here about Rome. We've pretty much hit on all of this stuff already. Shh, listen up. We talked about Octavian. We talked about his multiple names. The fact that there were no successors that were coming. Aaron, would you turn the lights off for me, please? Thank you. And the number of emperors that we had and just the chaos that was happening in Roman leadership. Now, we get to this point here, and we're going to start talking about culture of Rome. And some of the things that you would have expected should you have lived there at that point, or things we have today to look back on and understand about their way of life. And we begin here with the justice system, because there are a lot of pieces of our current government and judicial system that we look back at and we can connect, having similar ideas to what we would have seen in Rome. Not exactly the same, but there are some similarities. It should be in Unit 1, and there are 2 PowerPoints in there. There's the Roman Republic and then the Pax Romana. And that's one we're doing right now is the Pax Romana. It's the second half of Rome. So if you can't find it, let me know, but it should be in there. So in the Roman judicial system, every citizen of Rome had equal rights before the law. So every Roman citizen had equal rights before the law. Who are the Roman citizens? Well, the Jews, yes, they kind of became adopted Roman citizens. Some of them did. But who are we talking about? How do you become a Roman citizen? Let me ask you this. How do you become an American citizen?
You live there. You're born.
Okay, you're born there. Okay, that's one way. How else, Chance?
You take like the test or whatever.
Okay, you can go through, in our country, you can go through the naturalization process, and you can apply to become a citizen. Well, back in the Roman days, you could be born into citizenship, and how else might you become a citizen of Rome? We talked about this a little bit. Yeah, so you'd be declared a citizen, and there was an agreement that had to be made between you and the Roman government. Justin, do you remember what that agreement was?
I do not. I'm trying to find it.
Okay. So, Chance, what about you? Do you remember what that agreement was? If you were conquered under, I should make sure that I clarify my chances here.
Yeah.
Your chances.
Still,
You're literally talking here. Okay.
I know,
I
yeah.
thought you were like.
That was a slight pun that I didn't know if you pick up on, but it worked.
Wait,
So-
what did you say?
We're moving on. We're moving on. So, how did people come to this agreement? What was the agreement that people had with the Roman government regarding taxes and regarding war? Do you remember, Chance? They didn't necessarily get popular sovereignty because they didn't have a whole lot of say in it. But when you were conquered, Julie, do you remember?
It was like if you listen to their government and pay taxes, then they treated you like a citizen.
Okay, so that was part of it. Is you had to obey. You had to pay the taxes. What was the other part of the agreement? You had to send troops so they go to war, and that was part of you showing that you were a loyal citizen to the Roman government. So, if you were following all of those things, and you were considered a Roman citizen, then you'd have equal rights before the law. Gentlemen, guys,
Yeah.
you're becoming a distraction to me, so I have to imagine you're probably distracting other people too. So let's focus back up here. Now, many of the Roman legal principles that we look back here in Rome are often used again today. And I think it's interesting when you read through the New Testament and you hear about the Apostle Paul. Paul was a Roman citizen, and he claims that a number of times through his epistles. And so because of that, he was offered certain protection. And when he was imprisoned, they could not mistreat him, or there were certain things they could not do to him because of his Roman citizenship. If you were not a citizen, they could do almost anything they wanted to you. And so there is, yet again, another connection between the New Testament and history that helps us to be able to link them both together, and they make perfect sense. So those Roman legal principles, a lot of them are still used today, and we're not going to go into many of those specifically. So when we look at literature, there were a number of authors and people who contributed to further education and contributed to society because of their writings. And so there are 5 different authors here that are considered some of the most famous Roman authors that we need to know a little bit about. So I'm just going to give you the highlights. So first guy is Cicero, and he was one of the most dominant writers of the literary age of Rome. And so he wrote a lot of contributions to society. And he's probably best known, I think I put this up here, that he has some of the greatest Latin literature from Rome. So it's during the Roman Empire that people go from speaking Greek to now transitioning to Latin. And so many things are written in Latin, and it becomes the educated and the language of the educated and the scholars. Not everybody knows Latin or uses Latin, but it becomes something that if you were well educated or you were a writer, you often use Latin. Virgil's also an important guy here. He was known for his poetry, perhaps considered the greatest Roman poet. This reference is not going to mean a whole lot to you because we did not study Greece, but Homer is one of significant writers for helping us understand Greek history, and so Virgil is kind of the equivalent of that for Rome.
Did they compare him to him?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't we read about
Yeah.
Homer last year in English?
Yeah, we read all these.
You may have.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. So you guys from English class, then good. You have a frame of reference. You know who Homer is. This guy was the Roman equivalent of Homer. Still not quite as popular and quite as studied quite as much, but he still had some pretty impressive writings as well. I've only read excerpts of them. I confess I have not read anything in its entirety. Horace. So he is known as the famous poet of the Augustinian age. And many of these guys, they got their claim to fame because one of the leaders of Rome liked them and because they sponsored their writings. See, authors, they didn't make any money unless they had somebody to pay them to write. And if you didn't have somebody to pay you to write, then you were just some guy scribbling on a piece of paper. But Horace here, he received a lot of his sponsorships through the Augustinian age, through the Augustus leadership, and so that's why he's well known for that. This quote is one of my favorites from Horace. He says, "This is a fault common to all singers, that among their friends they are never inclined to sing when asked, but unasked they never desist." It means they never stop. So he's essentially criticizing. No, you don't need to know that. He's criticizing people that, they don't shut up, but they in front of their friends will say, "Hey, get up and sing a song." No. It's a false humility, is what he's trying to help us understand. It's somebody that's got false humility that I don't want to sing in front of you. No. I don't want to be embarrassed and stuff. But then when nobody asks them to sing, they get up and they just keep singing and singing and singing, whether they're good or not, and they won't sit down and be quiet because they want to be heard and they want to be known. Yeah, so that was his viewpoint on singers, and that was just one of his one of his quotes he's known for. So let's move on here to Ovid. Now, Ovid's claim to fame is in his book Metamorphoses. And this is a fictional book that he writes. It's all about love and mythology. And he puts together a number of myths from the ancient world. He pulls together some of the Greek gods and some of the stories from ancient Greece or even older cultures. And he puts them together in these collection of ideas. It was so far out there, so wild, so crazy, that it actually became banned from most of the libraries in Rome. And they would not allow it because they felt like it was going to corrupt the youth of Rome.
What?
This coming from a culture that is known for, crucifixions. It's known for throwing people to the lions. It's known for
I thought that's from Babylonian.
all kinds of debauchery and stuff.
Wait, why do they ban it again?
They banned it because of the content, because they thought it was going to corrupt the youth of Rome. Yeah.
Have you read it?
No, I've not read it. No, I have
I
not.
want to read it now.
Actually, I've heard of this before, and I wanted to read it in a while.
I will not endorse. I will not endorse it because I've not read it, and so I can't tell you whether it's worthwhile reading or whether you are going. Yeah, whether it's appropriate. I couldn't tell you, but this is what I do know about it. Then we have Livy. Yeah, Livy, Livy.
I thought you said Livia.
Livy. Yeah, this is not short for Olivia. No, this is a guy.
Whoa.
I like the name though.
Yeah. So his claim to fame is that he wrote a very lengthy history of Rome, and so a lot of what we understand about culture and society can be traced back to Livy's writing. Now, with all of these guys, we have to understand the idea of bias, that everybody has an angle and everybody has a perspective from which they're writing. So it's why we often need to take into consideration several authors and several writers before we draw a conclusion on a group of people and how they acted and what they were like. So that gives you a little bit of a overview of some of the writing that was happening in Rome. When it comes to art and architecture, one of their key contributions to art was the portrait bust. Yeah, it's called a portrait bust. Most famously, if you guys are into football, guys that get elected into the Football Hall of Fame, they put together a portrait bust made out of bronze, just like the Romans did. And so it's essentially, it's a 3D sculpture of your face and the top of your shoulders, and that's it. And then it kind of cuts you off.
Oh, like an Olive Garden.
Sure. Olive Garden has busts like that.
Yeah,
Really? I'll have to look for that. This is where the idea comes from. It comes from Rome, and you may see it in hallways of academic universities. You may see it in museums. Disney World has them.
At the Haunted Mansion, the people.
Really?
Yeah, I have a picture. Can I show you the picture?
They have some by the Hall of Music.
I would love to. Not right now, but I would love to see it at some point. Even better yet, next time you go to Disney World, take me with you. Show me. That'd be even better. I've
You
not.
just come on the Florida trip. We're going to Disney.
Just
Yeah,
for
come with
those,
us.
would your wife be okay with sending you, and then she has to stay home with all your kids?
No, she would not be okay, and you're right. I would have to bring her and my kids along because otherwise, I would.
Bring Avery. Just
Yeah.
bring her and
Yeah.
just bring Avery. Babysit
Yeah.
the rest of your kids.
Yeah.
Or Avery can come with us on the Florida trip and tell you all about it.
I'll take
Oh,
I'll take
there you go.
Toy Story and Star Wars.
There you go. They would love that. Yeah. Probably not happening.
You know that future salary.
So, the a couple of things that are really important to take note of here with the way that they created these. They created them very realistic. They created them showing their flaws. Now, most people, when you get your picture taken, you know, it comes to picture day, we want to wear something we know we look good in, or we're going to make sure that our hair looks good. You know, ladies might put on some makeup. Guys, if you woke up with a particular blemish on your face, you might throw on some makeup.
I like to see that.
I don't know.
There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
used to work with
Chance
the
would
guy.
have
I mean, as long
So-
as we're not like decking out in like lipstick and eyeliner, then I mean, why should you guys get ready?
So,
For real, they could slam
confession time. I used to do school plays, and so in high school, I was in the drama class, and so part of our drama grade was learning how to do stage makeup, and so we had to practice on each other, and so I learned how to do stage
You could
makeup.
probably do eyeliner better than
Um,
all of them.
Now, eyeliner. I did do eyeliner. I did not do the mascara. That was something we left to the girls. So,
It's
not do
easier,
that.
guys tend to have some, learn some
Yeah.
and watch it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't do eyeliner, I can't do it.
so anyway, going back to this, the idea here is that they were going to show people as they truly existed. They were going to show them with flaws. If they had a crooked nose, they were going to make them with a crooked nose. If they had a huge mole on their face, they were going to show them with that mole on their face. If they were going bald, they were going to show them going bald. So it was not something that they were going to just overlook. Where you go back to Greece, and some of the art we see in Greece, they would have overlooked and painted those things out of the photo or out of the sculpture. They would not have included that. And so there's a very big contrast between some of the art that you see in Rome and what you see in Greece. And so one of the other forms that they invented or that they made famous was the relief sculpture, which is somewhat a take on the portrait bust, but it's going to be the front half of the body instead of just the top half. And so what you're going to see here is there is a stone carving where they carve only part of the body out of the stone and they leave the rest of it flat on the back side. So this could be on the side of a wall, or if this were done just on a sheet of rock, it could potentially be leaned up against a wall or something. And so as you see in that photo there, it almost looks like they're coming out of the wall. And that's what's called a relief sculpture. And the Romans made that very famous. And once again, they were going to show that in its most realistic form. Yes, ma'am.
Wasn't that also like
The Egyptians did
They did hieroglyphics. I don't know if they did. I don't know if they did the three-dimensional aspect of it. You'll have to let me know if you find out that they did. I just haven't researched that enough to be able to give you a good answer on it. The key thing that the Romans did here was it was three-dimensional, so that if you ran your hands along it, you could feel the reality of it, I suppose. Haley?
no.
Yeah. Yeah, so that could be. They were usually pretty accurate, but they would just, it's kind of like the early Photoshop where they would, if you had a mole on your face, they're not going to put that in the Greek paintings. Rome would, because they wanted to show you in your humanity, they wanted to show you exactly as you were. So they would still make them look similar, but they might touch you up a little bit. Does that make sense? Romans are also famous for the aqueducts. I would assume that you have heard about aqueducts before. They are the aqueducts is this massive water system in which they brought water from all over into the city of Rome. Sometimes as far as 50 miles outside the city, they would bring water in, and this would be fresh water used for drinking, used for plumbing, used for irrigation. And so this photo here shows some of the ruins of some of the ancient aqueducts of the Romans. So you'd have these giant pillars that were built up, and the water would flow through a tunnel system up here in the top of the aqueduct. Why would they put them so high off the ground? Chance? Okay, part of it is that it was all powered through gravity, and so it had to be on a constant downhill slope. There's another reason, though, that they would put it up here.
So no one steals the water.
Yeah, to avoid tampering, so that you didn't have somebody come in and steal your water or contaminate it. If you were an enemy, you could put some kind of poison in the water, and it would flow into Rome and then poison all the people in Rome. So it was built high up off the ground. You can see this photo here. It shows the inside of one of those aqueducts, or the ruins of it, and it would work. It would run inside and flow into the city, and then the city would have fresh water and it would have running water. It was pretty advanced for the time. Sources say that there were about 50 million gallons per day that was flowing into the city of Rome. And so that's really, really efficient. We then get to the Colosseum. Yeah, everybody loves the Colosseum. And this is one of my favorite parts to talk about. It's usually one of the favorite parts for you all to talk about as well. But when we look at the Colosseum, I think it's important for us to understand a few things about it. First of all, it was as close as we get to an ancient football stadium. You know, and I would say our current football stadiums are somewhat the equivalent of the ancient Roman Colosseum. That if our civilization falls off the face of the earth and we're left and we have these football stadiums left 500-600 years later, people are wondering, what did they do here? And they're going to research and find out what the game of American football was like. You know, they're going to look at it maybe in a similar fashion as what we do to the Colosseum. Not on purpose, no, but that can happen. So a few things to know about the Colosseum. So the Roman Colosseum held about 50,000 fans in that Colosseum. So 50,000 people in the first century was a significant congregation of people. Haley? That's the capacity to be able to have a viewable seat. It was in the neighborhood of 50,000. Contrast that today to our modern football stadiums. So I don't know what Purdue Stadium holds. Does anybody know that off the top of your head? I don't know. It does not hold 50,000. I don't think. Just look at the size. So you could fit more people in the Coliseum than you could in Ross 8 Stadium for Purdue football games. Ohio State and Michigan, I believe, can hold 100,000. And so the Coliseum would not be able to hold as many people as those stadiums. However, just the size of it, the Coliseum itself would supersede those other ones. Libby?
So the capacity is 57,000.
At Ross 8? Oh, okay. I was mistaken on that. So yeah, I guess it would be pretty close to the seating capacity then for the Coliseum. I didn't think it would hold that many. Okay.
Wait, is that like including like the nosebleeds and all that?
Probably.
Okay.
So with that 50,000 admission, they didn't charge you any admission to go in. You go in totally free.
Yeah, it's like $5 to
That's why everybody was there. It was free. Oh wait.
Now your seating, however, your seating was based on social class. So when you walked into the Coliseum, you had to go to a specific section based on your stance in society. And so as you walk into the stadium, the lower levels and the levels that were closest to the emperor were going to be for the patrician class and for the senators and for the people who were elected to office. And then the seats that are a little further up and that are further away from the emperor, they are going to be for the lower class. And then you get all the way up near the top, and that's going to be for the slave class and for the people who were almost outcasts of society. Yes?
How did they know? It's free.
Yeah,
How
I'm
did they know
focusing on Julie here for just a second.
where you could, like, who was allowed to go where? Could people just go wherever? Or how did they know, like, what class?
How they know what class? A lot of times it had to do with the way you were dressed. And so could you sneak into another section? I don't know how they stopped you from doing that. Honestly, I don't know.
Do you remember the Titanic? Whenever Jack dressed up real nice and went to dinner, and everybody was like, "Oh, let me open that door for you," and then later he was in his clothes, and like everybody was like acting like he was scum of the earth.
Okay, so
Sorry, I really like that. Yeah, that's how we know.
we
Okay.
Okay. Now this is not movie class. So going back here to the Coliseum, they did have concessions, and there were a lot of times where vendors would bring in free items. They would bring in free bread, or they'd bring in items to help that they would help promote their business. And so they would bring it in and they would give it away, especially to the upper class. Now the lower class and the slave class, they were not going to get a whole lot of free stuff because they really couldn't afford to go out and buy it later. But these vendors would come in and they would just start throwing out food, grain, bread, any of that type of stuff that would help feed the people. Now the arena floor is interesting because the arena floor is made out of wood. And so that arena floor could be covered in sand when they would bring out the live animals, when they have the guys out there fighting. And that way it would also absorb any sort of fluids that were left there on the floor. And it could easily be cleaned up and it could easily be swept away and they could bring in new sand. And so it also provided a disadvantage for some of the fighters when it came to fighting against the animals. The animals were a little bit more used to the sand than what the fighters were. Yep. You're right. Yeah, and that's what I'm getting to here. So because those floors were made out of wood, they could remove the wooden floors, and below the wooden floors there was a series of elevators. There was a series of holding cages where they could store animals. They could hold prisoners. It was like a whole nother level of intricate prison cells. Yeah, it might be the best way to put it. And then they could take all those people out, and they could flood in that section. They would connect it to the aqueducts. They would flood the lower section, and they would raise it up enough so that way they could put ships in there, and they could have naval battles inside of the Coliseum. And
No way.
so they had a system where they would flood it, and they had a way to block the water exits, and then they would open up the doors for the water exits, and then the water would slide out and it would drain out. It would take a while for that to happen. How'd you get the boats in there? That I don't know. But we do know that they would put those in there. In fact, they would recreate many of the Punic War battles between Rome and Carthage, especially since Rome won. So this would draw a lot of crowds in there, and they would do this.
Why do we have nothing like this? If Rome
If
Rome had this, that
Why don't we fight
because
Yeah.
we're America.
Yeah.
Not like the killing, but I mean, how cool is that? Like, have like a stadium, and you could do sports, have plays, all this stuff, and then remove the floors and flood it, and have look, there's boats.
It's pretty awesome what they did there.
Like, what the heck? That's so freaking cool.
It is very cool. Yes.
I told you not to burn.
The animal abuse that went on.
So you don't care about animals?
Hold on.